Good morning, good evening, everybody. It's a big pleasure to be with you guys again in another free webinar of Poultry School. We have a big pleasure today that we will we have the presence today of Mr. Paco Fernández from Zinpro. Paco is an international business development, and today Paco is gonna share a very nice presentation about the new methodology for assessing welfare, profitability, and sustainability from the processing plant backwards. So as always, this webinar is going to be recorded and then it's going to be um, open in our YouTube platform. So Paco, thank you very much for your time and you can go ahead. Thank you very much, guys.
Good afternoon from Western Europe, where I am right now located, exactly between Spain and France in the Pyrenees Mountains. And we will talk today about the connection of stress with the welfare, the performance, and the meat quality in the chicken, which is a hot topic for me. And for that, we have developed a tool called the Perfect Carcass tool. And this presentation will revolve around it. First, a disclaimer. I will give you a few seconds so that you can read it. Okay, and now pay attention to this page of an American publication. They said, why 600 million chicken are missing from the tables of the people in 1 year? What is going on? The first question is, do you think this is a realistic claim? Yes or no? Let's analyze this fact because maybe some of you don't know that or didn't pay attention to that. But if I tell you that since you place one of the chicks in a farm until you slaughter them, you may have potential losses of 15% of your output, would you believe me? Let's see. First, if we consider the deaths on farm, that means the animals that die due to different pathologies, etc., or are euthanized because they are lagging behind and they will not catch up never. We can be talking about 5% of the initial numbers. If we consider then the deaths on arrival, we can be talking average 0.3%. And giving very conservative figures, it can be much higher than that, believe me, in general, not only in the DOAs. The third point is the life shrink and the carcass yield loss. So this means how much weight are we losing since we harvest the birds in the farm until they are shackled in the slaughterhouse. And again, a very conservative figure could be 4%. How about if you are scalding at a very high temperature, like for example, 59 degrees Celsius, 58, which is pretty common, especially in America. You would be melting away the fat of the carcass, and by doing that, you can be losing between 0.5 to 1% of carcass yield, believe me. On top of that, you are going to lubricate the pluckers or the pickers, and this is not a good idea. If the inspection is getting away the carcasses that are not fit for consumption due to pathological reasons, because of emaciation or whatever other reason, we are talking a condemnation rate about 1.1, 1.2%. According to the European Food Safety Authority, the average in Europe would be 1.12%. Then we should count the carcass lesions. What is the value we lose due to downgrades, due to trimmings in the carcass? Again, being conservative, I would say 4%. Then when we add everything, we are talking about 15% losses of potential sales at the end of every cycle. So this is a huge financial issue. We should take consideration of that. And somehow with this tool, we can have an influence in the control and the reduction of the number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. However, if we want to reduce the mortality and the culling, maybe it would be a good idea to start working as well at the breeder's level in reproduction, because then the quality of the one of the chick is going to be a relevant point to consider. So when we talk about carcass lesions and methodology to assess that, many people can tell me, yeah, but we already have video camera systems that are recording millions of data. In my experience, in many cases, these millions of data are not well processed, and many people don't know what to do with this data, okay? But on top of that, the most relevant lesions, the internal lesions, for example, the myopathies, are not identified by these video camera systems. And I will give you just a few examples of that. The first one is this YouTube video in which you can say, or you can see that this self-proclaimed genius is saying to the rest of the world, I found cancer in my chicken, referring to these green muscles that we can see in the middle of the carcass. This is cancer. And the problem is that this guy can have enormous repercussion, because thanks to the media, he can have in a very short period of time more than 4 million views. So imagine if your company is in the front page of a publication because one video like that. We all know this is not cancer by any means. This is a problem of hypoxia of the pectoralis minor due to the lack of space of this muscle to expand and to contract. But this is not an exception. By the way, I am referring on the left side of the screen to the type of lesion that corresponds according to the key welfare indicators of the International Poultry Welfare Alliance. Okay. In this next slide, you can see another example of what I am talking about. This lesion also is not identified by the video cameras. And this guy says, the breast on the left, these white ones, are corresponding to very unhappy birds because they were under constant darkness. They couldn't walk. They were not under the sun. And this is the reason why these breasts are so pale. However, the chicken, of the breast of the chicken on the right, were very happy chicken that were able to run, to walk in open spaces. This is the perception of this guy. However, we know the reality has nothing to do with this. On the left side, that means that for whatever reason, maybe heat stress, the perimortem period, this breast ran out of glucose, and then there was no transformation postmortem in lactic acid, no drop of the pH. Sorry, the opposite. There was a quick transformation of glucose into lactic acid, a very quick or fast drop of the pH, and that activated the proteolytic enzymes that reduced the water holding capacity of the muscle. And by doing that, we had what is called the PSE, meat, pale, soft, and exudative, or if you prefer, acidic meats. So this paleness is the reflection of the light on the water released by the short water holding capacity of this breast muscle due to the high amount of lactic acid produced in a very short period of time, due to the high temperature of the muscle and the high content of glycogen. On the right side, however, is the opposite. These were animals that ran out of glycogen, glucose. Therefore, the transformation postmortem into lactic acid was very poor. And therefore, the pH didn't drop. And then we have what is called the DFV breasts. You can see that, for example, in cold stress, when the animals to stay alive run out of glucose. But you know that, especially in Europe, but not only, the perception of the consumers sometimes gets more importance in the media than the scientific opinions. Another example of a lesion that cannot be detected by the video cameras is the backbone syndrome. And this is corresponding on the left side to the femoral head necrosis, or if you prefer, bacterial control necrosis with osteomyelitis, BCO of the femur. Here you can see in a severe case, there can be a leakage of bone marrow and blood to the adjacent tissues of the muscle. And when you cook this, once you have removed the bone, this area of myoglobin gets oxidized and becomes black. And this is called the backbone syndrome. Sorry, the black bone syndrome. This should be corrected. And it happens even more if the meat has been frozen slowly, because it gives way to the creation of ice crystals that favor this breakage of the blood vessels that will give way to an even more black bone syndrome. So Peter Drucker was the guru of business management as we know it today. And he said, if you cannot measure anything, you cannot improve it. And it's true, we need to measure what is the quality of our carcasses in order to improve things and be more profitable, more sustainable, and even to improve through a forensic approach, as I will explain later, the welfare of the birds. He also said, do what you do best and outsource the rest. The meaning of that is that you cannot pretend to know everything. You cannot know anatomy, physiology, processing, equipment technology, commercialization. So in everything related to carcass quality and meat quality, maybe it's a good idea that you rely on somebody from the outside that have the necessary expertise and wide opinion to help you to improve your processes without any subjectivity. We know that what we do, which is complexes of microminerals with amino acids, can improve poultry production in all the phases, including the farm phase, the loading and transportation, but we pay attention especially to the latest part of the chain, which is the processing plant. And I will explain the reasons now. But remember also that the last 10 to 12 hours of life of the chicken, the loading and transportation, are probably the most stressful period of the broilers in their lives. And this has to be taken into account for welfare purposes, okay? So if we want to talk about welfare and carcass lesions, why we should focus at the processing plant? For different reasons. The first one is that it's easier to measure and score than at farm level. Point number one. It's faster. We don't have to run after the chicken. It's more reliable because carcasses will not tell you beautiful stories to cover their backs. We avoid stressing the birds. We don't have to go into the farm, making them pile on each other or things like that. So no stress to the birds. And also, we are considering the more stressful period, which is the last 12 hours. If you focus your welfare programs on the farm, you may be losing this last period of life, which in my opinion is the most important in terms of carcass quality, meat quality, and welfare. So how we pay attention to the processing plant, the carcasses quality, and the meat quality, how we do it and why we do it. We do what we call a forensic approach. That means that by checking the carcass quality, we will try to find out what happened during the life of the birds in all the phases of production, going as back as the incubation period, the hatchery. Of course, considering the farm events, considering the harvesting, the transportation, and the arrival to the slaughterhouse, and of course, considering as well all the processing phases and problems. So we determine the priorities and the costs in each specific plant. And we usually focus on the main 3 or 4 priorities, no more than that, because we want to go step by step. We want focus. And also we determine not only which are the priorities, but also what are the costs associated. We have a clear identification of more than 20 different lesions, both external and internal. We put a degree of severity on them. And then in the severe lesions, we have a financial input because you have to trim, or you have to downgrade, or your customer will complain. This is the difference between a mild and a severe lesion, basically. Then we will try to find out what are the reasons of the problems, of the priorities, why this problem is happening in the first place, and then in which part of the process this is happening in the second place. And then we will set up action plans to minimize or to tackle the problem in the medium and the long term, and we will follow up. And we will see we are going in the right direction or not. In many cases, the solutions that we suggest will have nothing to do with our products. They will have to do just with management or changing the specific techniques of processing, for example, the voltage, the milliamperes per bird, the frequency, the temperature of the scalding. But the idea at the end is that we are not selling a product, we are selling solutions. So let's be practical. Imagine you are an integration and you have 4 different plants, and all the plants have the same genetics and the same diets. So they should perform very much in the same way. However, if we go for specific lesions, for example, scratches, as we can see here, we can see that the 4 plants behave in a completely different manners. We have one plant that has not total scratches, but severe scratches. So those that are really covering a big part of the pelvic area, for example, from 2.3% in one of the plants to 0.3% in another. The question is, how is it possible, such disparity in the degree of the lesions? And then we find out in the north plant, they have more control environment new plants. And we know by experience that the factor number 1 associated to scratches, not the only way by any means, but the main factor is the light intensity. So it makes sense that if we have fully climatized, completely closed artificial light that we can control in the number of lux, then probably we will have much less problems of scratches than in a plant like this one in the south that has more open farms with more penetration of natural light, especially in Southern Europe, for example. In this case, we have 8 times more scratches in one plant than in the other. So imagine how important it is to identify these factors. Let's go for another example. Femoral head necrosis is a good marker of welfare at the farm level because the severe ones may be problems of lameness in the farm. Well, not maybe, they are problems of lameness in the farm. And we have found also that there is a completely different number in some of the plants in regard to others. And then when we try to dig into the problem, we find out that in the plant with the higher incidence of severe femoral head necrosis, they are trying to work 100% of the flocks without any antibiotic. And obviously we have seen, and we know by experience as well, that in these countries or plants or integrations in which we don't work with any type of antibiotic whatsoever, we have double or triple number of severe femoral head necrosis. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about a bacterial infection that happens to be in the long bones, in the metaphyseal plaques. So these are just 2 examples of how we can help the integrations to identify problems. Now let's see if we find association between different factors and specific lesions. For example, the bird weight. And here you can see a clear association with the weight of the bird. The heavier they are, the higher the proportion of femoral head necrosis severe. So this is clear. But I would even point out that this is not the main factor associated with the femoral BCO. According to our experience, the main factor is the average daily gain. And to sustain that, imagine you have 3 kilograms birds. One of them is a conventional bird, and the other one is a different genetic for a slow growth. And despite the fact that they have exactly the same weight, we will find many, many more severe femoral head necrosis in the conventional bird than in the slow growth, because the average daily gain is going to be higher. And I have to tell you that those birds that at the end of the cycle are growing 120 grams per day or more are serious candidates for femoral head necrosis. The same for wooden breast. Wooden breast also has a clear association with the heavier birds, but I would also say that the sex plays a big role, but it makes sense because usually the males are heavier than the females. So normally in males, we will find, especially in the heavier ones, more severe wooden breast than in the smaller ones, the younger ones. So, but let's talk now about welfare and perfect carcass, which is the name of this tool. So we will try to identify how to link carcass lesions with welfare problems at farm level. So the first thing we need to discriminate is this lesion happening when the animal is alive or dead? Let's see. So a powerful parameter to measure welfare are the DOAs. That means the deaths on arrival. These are the birds that do not make it from the harvesting in the farm until they are shackled in the processing plant. So those birds that die during this period are considered DOAs. And this is a huge financial problem because we are losing all the weight, all the feed they have been eating, and all the medicines, vaccinations, and fixed costs inherent to the production of these deaths on arrival. So this is a huge financial penalty. And we have seen that probably the main reason of the DOAs is not the harvesting at the farm, is not the transportation, but is the truck reception area at the slaughterhouse, especially when these areas are not well conditioned against heat stress. And in this case, you can see that these birds are exposed to the sun, and they can be here in some cases for more than 1, 2, or 3 hours. Or they can be piled up in similar locations, not protected against the direct exposition to the light of the sun, to the heat of the sun. And this is the area where most of the DOAs happen. If considering average numbers, we should be talking about 0.2 to 0.4% of DOAs. Europe, in this case, we were talking about 0.3 to 1.2. So more than 3 times higher numbers than expected. So we have to pay attention to these stupid details that can cause a huge number of financial losses, animals that die, and of course, a big welfare issue. Apart from that, obviously, these birds are going to be losing weight hour by hour, some cases up to 0.4% per hour, if the temperature reaches 30 degrees or more centigrades. And of course, we are decreasing the quality of the meat. This will be birds much more prone to have acidic meats post-mortem or PSC. Typical lesions to consider welfare are the vascular problems, bruises, blood splash, hematomas. Let's talk about this. Do you think this back hematoma and pig of seal hematoma are a welfare issue? Yes or no? When we have hematomas, we have to pay attention to the extension. The extension is not too big. The color is pink, is not dark red. So that means this is a fresh hematoma. And if we have doubts, we have to cut and see if there is clotting or not, coagulation. Because clotting happens more or less 50 minutes post-mortem, 50 minutes after the lesion happened in the first place. So also we have to consider another fact. After bleeding the birds out, still 50 to 55% of the blood remains in the carcass. That means that some bruises may happen post-mortem, and this is the case here. So this is a postmortem back bruise, very likely due to the effect of the pluckers or the pickers. So this is not a welfare issue. However, let's consider the same lesion, but in a different case. Do you think this is premortem or postmortem? Here we have a hematoma exactly in the same place in the pelvic area, but this is very extensive, very dark, and if you cut and see, we will probably see clotting points. So that means this problem is not happening at the pluckers, it's happening at the farm. And then we have to think if this is a problem that happens during the harvesting of the birds, maybe by trapping the birds when closing the drawers or the crates of transportation. So this is a welfare issue. Again, the same dilemma we have here. On the left, we see an extended hematoma with clotting, with dark discoloration and extended. So that means this is a problem coming from the farm, probably from harvesting. It's very likely this happened when we catch the bird by one leg. However, the one on the right is smaller, is pinkish, so this is happening post-mortem. So the one on the left is a welfare issue, the one on the right is not a welfare issue. You see, the difficulty of being clear about welfare or not is in differentiating if the lesion happened when the animal was alive or not. And sometimes it's not as clear cut as I am showing you here. In this case, again, we have a typical lesion of catching one bird by one leg. And this is happening in the adductor muscle here. And we see a lot of clotting, dark extended bruise. So that means we have no doubt this is happening during the farm harvesting, the collection of the birds at the farm. Now we have another typical lesion of welfare, which is called the red eye or axillary hematoma or bruise. And remember, this area is highly irrigated because it has to provide oxygen and nutrients to the two most powerful muscles of the bird, which are the pectoralis major and minor, that are involved in flying, both of them. But this lesion is a clear marker for me of panic flapping, not normal flapping. Apparently, this is an extended lesion, it's dark, so maybe it looks like it's coming from the farm, right? Okay, let's open and see. And now we have a surprise because we don't see any coagulation. The color of the blood is not so dark. So in fact, this is happening in the plant. This is not happening in the farm. And then when we delve into the problem, we discover they have a damper. When I talk about a damper, I'm talking about this. So the birds are damped alive and they flap vigorously and they can produce red eye hematomas. But there are other cases in which you can have red eye problems. Another can be, for example, stunning, in which electrical stunning, when the birds are coming to the stunning bath, not with the head, but with the wing. And then they will take away from the water the wing and produce these red eye problems. But in this case, obviously, they will happen all mostly in the same wing, either the left or the right, depending which one is the wing that in this specific line is coming first to the stunning bath. So as you can see, this is a very interesting development because we have to investigate what is the reason of the problems, and that makes it more interesting to solve the puzzle. So let's talk about the stunning. Here I have a typical lesion of electrical stunning, which is the blood splash in the thigh, in the internal side of the thigh. And we will compare 3 different stunning methods. One of them is gas. Another one is electrical stunning, but I have to say this is in Europe. So this is electrical stunning with European parameters. And European parameters imply high intensity current with high voltage and especially and specifically high milliamperes per bird, more than 100 up to 200 milliamperes per bird. So this is the reason why in Europe many people are switching from electricity to gas, because this high intensity voltage required by law is destroying the carcass quality in many cases, unless you know how to play the game, especially with the frequency. But this is another chapter. So we have gas, we have electrical stunning European style, and then we have the double H, which is the hard halal or strict halal. And now I must remember the religious stunning, just mentioning the Bible, the Genesis, in which God told to Noah that the humans are not allowed to eat the meat that still has the blood that sustains the life in the animal. So this is why the Jews and the Muslims, both of them, are kind of obsessed with the presence of blood in the carcass. And this is why in the kosher and the hard halal, that is, for example, conducted in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, there is no stunning at all. So it's a neck cutting without any stunning. The idea is to keep the heart pumping so that the bleed out is more complete and faster. And even in some cases, like in the kosher, they put the carcasses later on salt, so that by osmosis, even extracts more blood from the carcass. Just to explain the situation. So the HH is no stunning. And then if we talk about a typical lesion of electrical stunning, obviously we see a big problem with the electrical stunning European style. If we do the same with other countries that are not strict with the voltage and the amperage, probably we would see much less problems of blood splash. And obviously, if the problem number one is blood splash with your customers, I would recommend you go for gas, because you can see if the gas combination with oxygen with the air is correct, you will have no blood splash at all. This is just one example. Let's go for the already familiar red eye problem, panic flapping. In this case, look, when we kill the birds without any stunning, look at this marker of welfare, in my opinion, which is the red eye. We go up to the roof, especially when compared with the gas and with the electricity. So could we use red eye as an indicator or a marker of welfare? The answer is yes, in capital letters. Another interesting case. These are slow growth, high paying carcasses in Central Europe with a problem of scratches. And you may think that slow growth would be the perfect carcass without any problem, but this is not the case. And here you have the proof. You are paying a lot of money per kilogram of this bird. However, these scratches are going to reduce drastically the price, of course, because even they have to go for full condemnation. In this case, you see, we have a cellulitis plaque that is inducing in the subjacent tissue of the muscle an inflammatory reaction. Remember that these plaques have, in 90-95% of the cases, E. coli, and some of them also can have Staphylococcus aureus, both of them bacteria able and capable of producing toxins. So this is a public health issue, and the inspector should remove completely the carcass, the whole carcass. The question is, why is this happening in the first place? Okay, when you are removing the smaller birds, so conducting a thinning, you keep the whole farm off feed for several hours. And then when the thinning is finished, you switch on the lights again, full intensity, and you bring back again the feed. But the birds are really very nervous, especially this is low growth genetics that are more excited in normal conditions than the conventional birds. And they scratch each other because they want to be the first one to reach the feeders, and they produce these nasty lesions. So this is a welfare issue. In one country that is especially devoted and dedicated to welfare. Interesting, paradoxical. So we are collecting data from now 40 countries, more than 200 companies, and we are trying to make statistical data analysis with that, establish association of factors with different lesions, and we are able to identify interesting things. For example, if we select just Europe, not the rest of the globe, and we check for wing bruises, we can see that our product is able to do something, but not much. So this is not a problem associated with intrinsic metabolic problems of the bird, which is what our product helps to cope with. But here, for example, the stunning method plays a much important role. So if we are doing kosher or hard halal, we will have more problems of wing hematomas than if we are going for electrical, conventional, or electrical halal, so low intensity, or even gas. So in this case, the stunning method plays a big role in the lesion. Another example, scratches. Again, talking just about Europe. In this case, we see that Avila zinc, which is our main zinc source used in Europe, is able to reduce substantially the scratches. So in this case, we have a clear effect, and we can give a clear recommendation to our customers about our product. If we talk about wing fractures, again, we see that our product will have a small impact. However, the stunning method, again, is going to play a big role. And to the surprise of someone, the gas is the worst. Why is that? That with gas stunning, we have more wing fractures. The problem of the gas stunning, especially the old systems, the newest ones are much better, is that first, the gas enhances a rapid rigor mortis. So the rigor mortis happens faster than with electricity. Point number one. Point number two, in electrical stunning systems, since you kill the bird until you defeather them, it takes no more than 5, maximum 7 minutes. However, in gas systems, it can take a minimum of 10 minutes up to 20. This is way too long. So some birds, especially under high temperature of the body conditions, they will develop rigor mortis very early. In some chicken, it can even start after 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Some birds will have rigor mortis. The problem is that you cannot defeather them. Rigor mortis is the enemy number one of the feathering. So you would increase the scalding temperature and you will increase the pressure at the pluckers. And both of these conducts will increase wing fractures and even spaghetti meat. So we have to be careful with these stupid details, okay? But remember, we can help you to identify these problems at plant level. And this is what we do. We provide solutions. With this data analysis, we can also find out what is the effect of our complexes of minerals, in this case, specifically talking about zinc and talking about dermatitis. Dermatitis is a problem that I see more and more all around the globe, especially in these places that keep the same litter flock after flock, and in these cases in which there are no limits in the stock density, okay? Ammonia formation. So we see here that in mild lesions as well as in severe lesions, we have a statistical reduction of the problem just by using Avila zinc. Obviously, this would not be our only recommendation. We would go for also some management points to improve things as much as possible. And that's the end of my presentation, just after 38 minutes. So I'm open for discussion. And if you don't have time now, you can ask Rodolfo, and we will be more than happy to try to answer you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paco. Was very interesting presentation and a lot of information. And I think that our audience can have a very nice idea what is all this about. And I think that we don't have any question from our live audience. And like we say, this is gonna be shared in our platforms in YouTube in maybe 1, 2 weeks. And you can find Paco in social media, in our ads, and any other question you can reach him. So Paco, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next one, guys. Thank you, Paco.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you to everybody. Bye bye.